I don't like the word contrarian, probably if you go through enough videos. So I'm often arguing against the consensus, whether the consensus is in films, comics, television, novels, fiction overall. Like, for instance, James Joyce, I would say, is a great writer. But Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, to me, are very, very poor novels. I just don't think they're very good. Nabokov, I think, is actually very solid. But even he, I think, is being really overrated. Same thing with people like Steven Spielberg. I think he's a solid director, but I don't think he's as good as people say he is. And so on and so forth. So I'm usually against the crowd when it comes to a lot of things. But now we get to Morbius. And I would have put this out sooner, but honestly, trying to look at it very impartially and giving it a solid chance, I'm not going to say many things that are different from most people, which is it's really, really bad. I agree. It is really, really bad. I would say it qualifies as one of the worst films of the year already. And we're getting there to the halfway point. We can legitimately put things on the list. This is definitely going on the list. Unless the rest of the movies this year are so, so terrible that Morbius will be, what, the 11th or 12th worst film? It's going to get into the top 10, no doubt about that. That said, is it as horrifically stupid and terrible as other people are saying it is? No, I disagree. I can't call this a 1 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. It's not Battlefield Earth. Battlefield Earth, I usually cite as the marker, like, well, good and bad. How do we know something is good and bad? If it's near the territory of Battlefield Earth, it's really, really bad. And yes, Battlefield Earth at times is laughable. You can actually enjoy it because it is so stupid that you will be laughing at it. So I would still give that somewhere in between a 1 and a 2. But being serious, it's a really, really bad film. So, so terrible on so many levels. Morbius, I can't call terrible on almost every level. It's coming close because it is, for the most part, worthless. It's kind of useless. You don't really need to watch it. It's not really adapting the comic book character. They do have some interesting callbacks, and they do have part of the plot structured around the Morbius comic. So if you're a comic book historian like I am, yes, you should see it. So a comic book expert will probably have to see it. If you're a Spider-Man expert, as I like to put myself out as, you'll probably have to see it just to plug in that little hole. But if you're the average person, then yeah, this isn't really necessary. If you have extra income, I can think of like literally 10 other films you'd probably be better off. But if you do just want to see a very dumb, kind of low stakes action film with some okay CGI here and there, then this is the film for you. But if you want a genuinely good film, even a good fantasy film or a superhero film or whatever, a Spider-Man film, then I can't argue with the consensus. No Way Home beats this on so many levels. I would say No Way Home is 10 times better than this, but I don't think No Way Home is that impressive either. But I'd have to be honest and say No Way Home is either above average or good. Morbius is competent in many levels, whether the performance, the plot, the writing, the directing, the special effects. It's like the only part that I thought was actually a little bit above average was the music. The music was actually interestingly effective in the first third. That was actually well done. But so many things were just really, really borderline terrible or just barely competent. And the story itself, even describing it, is like nothing. Basically, just Morbius is sick as a child with some rare disease. We don't know what this disease is, it's just rare. He experiments with bats and devises a cure, but shocker, the cure has a twist and turns him into a vampire. They don't seem to understand the comic book character. He's not really a vampire. He just has, quote, vampiric power. He's not really a vampire, right? It's not supernatural. It's not like a cross or holy water will affect him. But they keep insisting he's a vampire throughout this film. And it's like, clearly you don't even know the mythology, so they're confusing stuff. Because at times, he does need blood, but there's not a consistency in terms of the bloodlust or his powers. Like, he's super fast in certain places. It seems like he can fly early on, but then he doesn't. So his powers are inconsistent. His disease is very inconsistent. I mean, basically, he's just limping around sometimes. It's like, okay. So what the disease is, what his powers are, it's just very generic. It's like, okay, he has super strength and he can grow fangs. And it's like, okay. Even at the level of a vampire film, you will catch very clever references to vampire films, but that's about it. It doesn't really do that much, even in terms of the vampire genre. It's just very low rent all the way through. I do think Jared Leto, though, was very dedicated. He at least gave it a solid try. He is very into the role. I actually think his acting was probably the best. People were really into Matt Smith becoming this sexy, uber evil vampire antagonist, but I thought he was stupid and boring, and the performance was really ripping off American Psycho. This thing rips off a lot of movies. It's ripping off The Usual Suspects in a sequence. It's taking a lot from Batman Begins. It is stealing most of Batman Begins for the entire story. Scene for scene, they're just taking from Nolan. So it's not very creative. It just goes through its plot beats very kind of functionally. It's like, okay, you won't be confused. Like, okay, he turns into a vampire. This scene on the boat where he kills people, that is from the comics, although they removed the context. And they did improve things a little bit because I defend the Spider-Man cartoon a lot. I think for the most part it's really good, but they did get things a lot wrong, not just in terms of the comics, but I think they made some poor choices. They made Morbius needlessly like this East European with a very thick accent. They're like, I eat tortoises for breakfast. They did the right thing by making him American again and just making him quote, normal. He doesn't have this weird accent. So I thought that was a good idea. Like, just don't do that. Don't make him into like some kind of knockoff of Dracula with a really thick European accent. So they made some right choices here and there, but it's not enough to save this thing. It's really jarringly silly and stupid. If you go for those kinds of films, that's fine. But it's going to be disappointing on so many levels. And definitely don't see this if you expect to see the Vulture. The Vulture is in here literally a few seconds at the very end. And I will spoil it because it's really nothing. Basically, the Vulture just somehow slips into, I guess, the Spider-Man dimension. This dimension. I don't know how they're doing it. The dimensions are very, it's unclear how they're marking the stuff from No Way Home. But anyway, he's in this new dimension. He's been freed, right? Because he was in prison from Homecoming or whatever that was, out of nowhere decides to contact Morbius. How he got contacted Morbius, I have no idea. Morbius comes out to see him, and he's like, hey, you kind of know Spider-Man, I kind of know Spider-Man, let's team up together to take on Spider-Man. Because Morbius is a hero in this, and he just is intriguing. So are they even going to be a villain group? Are they going to be the Sinister Six? Or are they going to help Spider-Man? Are they going to be in a between group? They're just going to be stealing stuff? Are they like anti-heroes? I don't have a clue. This thing never sets the whole meeting up, so it just comes out of nowhere. He probably wasn't even in the Vulture suit. He probably just had an extra do it. But he is in the film. He makes a cameo. Doesn't even seem to be tied to Spider-Man until the very end. So I'm like, I mean, they have the like Daily Bugle in the scene. That was nice and interesting, but that's about it. So it is in the Spider-Man verse, but Spider-Man really doesn't show up. Venom doesn't show up. They don't even talk about Venom or Spider-Man. So it's like, what is the goal of this thing? I have not a clue. It just seems to be just what it is. It's a okay special effects here and there, but dumb plot, borderline competent performances, really absurd plot, and even the fight at the end where they usually put in an effort, it's just so stupid. And the way he wins is silly. The bats just help him. That's from Batman Begins too. So it's like it really is really worthless on so many levels. But if you just want an okay or below average movie to pass the time and you just like silly action, this will be for you. But otherwise, it's very frustrating to watch Morbius.